Star Gladiator is the first 3D fighting game produced by Capcom. It looks like something between a homage and a ripoff of Star Wars, and there's good reason for that. The game initially began life as a pitch for a Star Wars fighter. It became clear after multiple pitches that they wouldn't be getting the license, so they took the game concepts they had and workshopped it into an original concept instead. This wasn't unusual for Capcom. The King of Dragons, an early arcade beat-em-up from them, started life as a Dungeons & Dragons beat-em-up, but they were unable to secure the license at the time. Capcom higher-ups loved the concept, however, and allowed the game to go into full development. And as we know now, Capcom eventually did secure those D&D rights to make 2 games based on that license, Tower of Doom and Shadow over Mystara. Star Gladiator ran on the Sony ZN1 arcade board, which was more or less PS1 hardware, only using swappable ROM boards instead of CDs. Capcom would also use this board for Street Fighter EX, and the updated version of the board, the ZN2, would power the first Rival Schools game, Strider 2, and Star Gladiator's own sequel, Star Gladiator 2, or Plasma Sword as is known in North America. The first game received a faithful PS1 port in 1996, owing to the board's similarity to PS1 architecture, while Plasma Sword, bizarrely enough, was ported to Dreamcast instead, resulting in a game that looked a bit less impressive than its contemporaries on the platform, like Soul Calibur or even Capcom's own Project Justice. I opened this video with the statement that this was Capcom's first 3D fighting game, and it shows. I have a soft spot for the game, but it's absolutely Capcom familiarizing themselves with 3D fighters first and foremost, and it doesn't look or play nearly as well as other 3D fighters of the era, like Soul Edge or Virtua Fighter 3, both of which had been out in arcades by that time. The protagonist of the series is Hayato Kanzaki, and man does this guy have a backstory. Hayato was the orphan leader of a Japanese street gang. After an incident where a member of his gang, his best friend, was shot and killed by the police, Hayato is arrested and sentenced to a personality erasure procedure. However, a social worker intervenes on Hayato's behalf and saves him from that treatment, instead adopting him into his care. He starts getting his life in order thanks to this act of kindness, but soon realizes that the social worker is in deep debt and the orphanage is in danger of being shut down. To earn the money to save the orphanage, he becomes a bounty hunter and is recruited into the Star Gladiators, an elite force of warriors trained and assembled to fight against the Fourth Empire, led by the evil Dr. Bilstein. Bilstein was the person who discovered and innovated on plasma technology, which powers the very weapons that most of the cast uses in the game, including Hayato's own plasma sword. Hayato canonically vanquishes him in the first game, but that only signaled the beginning of their problems. Hayato's sole playable appearance in the Versus games was in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Hayato is one of a few characters in the series up to this point that debuted in the 3D game, alongside fellow Capcom characters Jill, Tronbot, and Servbot, so seeing him rendered in sprite form is really cool. I'd actually argue that he has more impressive animations here compared to his home series. Speaking of that, Hayato is the first character we're covering here that actually originates from a fighting game series, so making comparisons here should end up being a bit easier than usual. Pretty much all of Hayato's moveset is lifted from his home series, with his special moves and hyper combos in particular being taken directly from Plasma Sword, and his Plasma Auto combos coming from the first Star Gladiator game. Let's begin with his command normals. First is Hien, done with forward and heavy punch. He also has this in both Star Gladiator and Plasma Sword. Second is a downward stab attack that can be done in the air with down and heavy punch. This seems to be inspired by the leaping attack that can be done on knockdown opponents in Star Gladiator. Dokuryu is a cross-up attack that can be done by pressing heavy punch out of a dash. It also has a follow-up attack, Soryu, which is initiated with a second heavy punch input during Dokuryu. This is taken from the same dash attack from Hayato's home games. Shiden is Hayato's quarter circle forward and punch attack, a double saber slash. He's had this in Star Gladiator, but the visual flair is directly recreating the Plasma Sword version of the move. Guden is Hayato's dedicated anti-air, unsurprisingly done with a Dragon Punch motion in any punch. Like Shiden, Hayato's had this from the start of his series, but visually it's based on the Plasma Sword incarnation. It can also be done in the air. Pressing forward, back, and then both punches initiates Hayato's command grab, which launches opponents into the air. Hayato can then follow up with a combo from there. This also comes from Star Gladiator as well, but even has largely the same input. One of the most interesting aspects of Hayato's inclusion here is how some of the mechanics from his series are represented. The first example of this are his plasma combos. Plasma combos in Star Gladiator were essentially canned combos accessible to the entire cast. Star Gladiator has a much more rigid combat structure compared to other Capcom fighters, even its sequel, so this helped give the cast some combo options. The plasma combos he has access to in Marvel 2 are lifted entirely from Star Gladiator, even with really similar inputs. He essentially has two sets of plasma combos which are initiated with different inputs. Holding back and pressing a light punch is what starts his first set. After initiating the light combination, pressing light punch 3 more times gives you his Suzaku Ranbu plasma combo. Next up is Keigon, which has 2 variations. His second set of plasma combos are initiated by first holding back and then pressing heavy punch. This allows him to follow up with his Gurren plasma combos. Like Keigon, he has 2 variations here. Next up, we'll get to his hyper combos. First up is Rosetsu-san. This is taken from the super of the same name in Plasma Sword. Plasma Field is perhaps Hayato's most interesting super. He generates a field of energy around him briefly, and if it hits anyone not blocking, even an assist, he goes into a state that allows him infinite use of any of his hyper combos, at least until the dedicated meter for it runs out. This is essentially Marvel vs. Capcom 2's way of implementing Plasma Sword's Plasma Field mechanic. For those familiar with Darkstalkers, and very specifically the third game, Vampire Savior, you already know of the Dark Force mechanic there. Dark Force is a unique state that every character can activate that bestows character-specific buffs, like QB being able to freely fly across the screen, or Morrigan having a shadow duplicate that mirrors her actions. Plasma Field works similarly in Plasma Sword, with every character getting unique buffs. Hayato in particular gets the range on his attacks buffed massively, as well as giving all of his sword attacks OTG properties, meaning you can more or less combo someone without end until Plasma Field wears off. I don't think the exact same buffs could have been given to Hayato here without being noticeably unbalanced, so infinite meter usage for a short time is a good enough compromise in my eyes. Next up is Engetsu, the only projectile attack Hayato has access to. He's had this in Star Gladiator, but it was Plasma Sword where it was upgraded to fire off projectile shockwaves, which the Marvel 2 version goes with. Hayato's level 3 is pretty neat, and done with a motion similar to Raging Demon. The screen goes dark as he goes into his Black Hayato state and slashes up the opponent before one more dramatic slash. Black Hayato's design was Hayato's Player 2 costume in Star Gladiator, but in Plasma Sword it became canonized as his alternate violent personality. Apparently during he and Bill Stein's final encounter in the first game, Bill Stein implanted a microchip in Hayato that ended up birthing this alternate personality. Do be aware that despite it being a level 3, you can also use this freely during Hayato's Plasma Field super as well. Hayato's first assist is Shiden. His second assist is Gurren. His third assist is Shiden again for whatever reason. Here are all of his colors. Hayato has a handful of Easter eggs relating to his home series here. Occasionally, in his intro, you'll see him jump off of a motorcycle. This is the same motorcycle he's seen within the opening of Plasma Sword, alongside some other promotional art for that game. Occasionally, another character from Star Gladiator will pop up in his win pose. Saturn, a green alien street performer from the planet Saturn, but not the Saturn we know in our solar system. Then there's June, a fellow Star Gladiator and a close friend of Hayato. She's probably the second most recognizable character from Star Gladiator. Additionally, some concept design notes for Hayato show some concept art for action sprites involving her. Apparently, she was meant to appear in a slightly bigger capacity, but time constraints kept it from happening. If I had to guess, I imagine she was either going to be a summonable assist unique to Hayato, similar to how the Captain Commando team was implemented into Commando's moveset, or strictly a cameo in a hyper combo, similar to how Batsu and Hinata appear in Kyosuke's level 3 super in Capcom vs SNK 2. Last is L from Plasma Sword. She uses a plasma ring just like June, and throughout the game is very concerned with making sure June in particular is safe and that Ghost Bilstein is taken out. As it turns out, L is the future daughter of June and Hayato, traveling back in time to defeat Ghost Bilstein, who, in the future, in a never-ending hunt for Hayato, attacks her home and kills June in the process. The Star Gladiator games have some pretty wild character stuff in them relative to other Capcom fighters. If you're at all a connoisseur of fighting game lore, I highly recommend reading up on it. It goes to some pretty crazy places. Though Marvel 2 is the only Versus game he's playable in, Hayato has cameos in 2 other Versus games. He appears in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 in the Days of Future Past stage, on the poster homaging the iconic cover of Uncanny X-Men issue 141. At least he didn't get killed like a Mingo apparently did. Rest in peace, you weird, groovy plant thing, you. Hayato's more notable cameo is in Tekkaman Blade's ending in Tatsunoko vs. Capcom Ultimate All-Stars, where he saves Blade from a Ghost Bilstein rampage before teaming up with him to take Bilstein down. This one gets doubly hilarious when you factor in Hayato's voice actor, Toshiyuki Morikawa, also voices Tekkaman Blade in Tatsunoko vs. Capcom itself. As it relates to video games, Morikawa has a long history in the VA field with Capcom specifically, providing the voice of Charlie Nash in nearly every pre-Street Fighter V appearance of his, provided the voice of Ryu in nearly every appearance Ryu had between Street Fighter Alpha 3 and the Capcom Fighting Evolution, has been the Japanese voice actor for Dante for Devil May Cry 4 onwards, and the Japanese voice actor for Leon S. Kennedy from Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City onwards. However, his most famous video game role by far is that of Sephiroth, who he's provided the Japanese voice for since his iconic cameo as the Super Boss in Kingdom Hearts in 2002. Hayato was more or less a one-hit wonder for the series, but I think he represents a pretty interesting fighting game time capsule for Capcom. He's from that era in the late 90s, early 2000s where it felt like there was a new Capcom fighter coming out every other week. His series may not have set the world on fire, but they do showcase the boundless creativity Capcom's fighting game division had back then. And I think it's really cool that he, alongside other characters that would probably just be obscure footnotes in Capcom history if not for the Versus games like Jin, got some shine in these games. I don't think it's controversial to say that more people probably know him from Marvel 2 than his home series, and while that sounds not great on paper, in practice, I think that's not particularly bad. Good characters and good character designs don't deserve to languish in obscurity, and if Marvel 2 is what he's more known for these days, I say that's fair play. I'm also a big fan of how the mechanics of his games are implemented here. My favorite thing about crossover fighters is seeing how mechanics from different fighting games or even non-fighting games are reconciled in one universal fighting engine, and it's always fun to see what the developers come up with. All that said, that's going to do it for this video, so be sure to like and subscribe as it really helps the channel. Like always, stay safe, take care, and thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.